we're going to go to Mitch McConnell. He's going to be talking to Candy Crowley on CNN, and she's going to hold his feet to the fire a little bit. These are some amusing answers. Let's start with clip number 6.
Right off the bat, the president says you're being deceptive in describing this bill.
Well, Candy ought to talk to his own Treasury Secretary, who agrees with me, as well as the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal, that there is a bailout fund in the bill that was reported out of the Banking Committee, the partisan bill that came out of committee on a party line vote.
But that bill
I don't think that's in dispute.
But that bailout is funded by the banks themselves, is it not? It's not a taxpayer bailout.
Well, Robert Reich, who was Bill Clinton's Secretary of Labor, says it's a bailout fund. I mean, regardless of how the money is produced, it is a bailout fund that sort of guarantees in perpetuity that we'll be intervening once again to bail out these big firms. The President's own Secretary of the Treasury, toward the end of the week, confirmed that they'd rather not have it in there. I think we're all in agreement that the bill that I was referring to, except maybe the President hadn't talked to his own Secretary of the Treasury, has a bailout fund in it.
Regardless of where the money comes from. No, not regardless. If it comes from the taxpayers, that sucks. If it comes from the bankers to pay for their own dissolution if they screw up, that's fine. See, what it would have done is it would have put money, the banks would have had to put money into a fund that if they went bankrupt, they would use that money to solidify the situation as they broke up that bank. That makes perfect sense. Now, I think $50 billion is comically low. I would have made it much larger. But to say, oh, regardless, it's a bailout fund. No, not regardless. It makes an enormous amount of difference where the money comes from. Now, the problem is, and he never answered that. Did you notice that? He didn't say, oh, well, no, it's coming from the taxpayers, because that would be a lie, right? He just kept going back to, well, other people are calling it a bailout fund. The Wall Street Journal, owned by Rupert Murdoch, their editorial side calls it a bailout fund. Wow, that's really persuasive. And I don't know what he's referring to in the Washington Post. God knows what they're up to, but I don't trust Mitch McConnell to accurately describe that at all. The one thing he is right about is the one guy who was on his side was Treasury Secretary Tim Geithner, who was originally opposed to this in the first place. What he wanted to do was have the banks put into that fund after they went bankrupt, which is a plan that is retarded. It's also Republican. You know why? Tim Geithner was a Republican. To my knowledge, Tim Geithner never became a Democrat. He used to be a Republican. He never made the switch over. But regardless of whether you call him a Democrat or a Republican, all he's ever done is fight for the banks inside the Obama administration. So he gives the Republicans a perfect opportunity. What? Our friend Tim Geithner agrees with us. Now, Geithner doesn't anymore. Now he supports the official position. But earlier, he did make the same point as McConnell, and it was just as bad a point back then when Geithner made it as when McConnell makes it now. But Crowley's going to not let him off the hook. She's going to go after him in clip number 7 a little bit more.
Senator McConnell, the president, pretty tough on you during his radio address. Okay, so what the president is saying is you met with Wall Street leaders, with the man who raises money for Republican Senate races, and talked about how to block this bill. Did the meeting take place? What was the conversation?
Well, it was. We certainly didn't talk about blocking the bill. I didn't know anybody
no, of course.
who's in favor of blocking this bill. I also met recently with the Kentucky bankers who are also opposed to this bill, the community banks, the little guys on Main Street. We're all meeting with a lot of people. This is the current subject. For the president to politicize this in the same speech in which he said we ought to depoliticize it is really quite amusing. At the same day, the Democratic National Committee is putting up web ads trying to attack Republicans on this issue. I thought he wanted us to have a bipartisan bill. That's what I'd like to have. We're in the process of gathering information from people all across the country, from Wall Street to Main Street, to try to get advice about doing this right. Everybody in the Senate, everybody, Candy, in the Senate wants to pass a bill. But one that is opposed by the Kentucky bankers is certainly going to raise some concerns on my part. We need to fix it, get it right, and pass it on a bipartisan basis.
If it had to do with the Kentucky bankers, why did you go up to Wall Street and talk to the top 25 bankers in the country, none of whom were from Kentucky? It's because, and he said, well, we didn't talk about killing the bill there. Really? You went to Wall Street and talked with the top 25 bankers in the country, and you didn't talk about financial reform? You didn't talk about how they want to kill the bill? Because they do want to kill the bill. They admit that. So You just had a conversation about what? Tennis? Golf? Come on, man. It is so, the things he says are literally unbelievable. And he says, I don't know anyone trying to block the bill. Except you! You did a speech last week where you said, I'd like to kill this bill. And you got 41 Republican senators to sign a letter saying, we'd like to kill this bill. I don't know anyone trying to block this bill. What do you mean? But Obama is politicizing this when McConnell gathered 41 Republicans to say we want to kill this bill because you didn't include us in the participation of the building of this bill enough, which is totally not true either. All right, but Crowley, once again, goes after him on John Cornyn because he's the guy who collects money for the Republican senators trying to run for re-election. Let's listen in on clip number 8.
Well, if the president is playing politics, you have to admit that it raises suspicions when you are meeting with Wall Street executives, as I take it you did, with Senator Cornyn, who raises money for Republican races. Doesn't that sort of set you up for this sort of accusation that you went in there with the fundraiser to talk about, you know, we've got to fight this bill? I mean, what did you talk about?
Well, look, we were talking about financial regulation, as everyone in the country is talking about it.
Oh,
Most of the
so
people in New York supported the president. The vast majority of them are on his side. They support him during the election. They still support him. Is he saying we shouldn't sit down with his supporters and talk about a bill that he thinks we ought to pass and that I think we ought to pass?
Why was Senator Cornyn there?
Candy, he is the one who's trying to politicize this issue. We're the ones who are trying to get it right. When the Kentucky bankers tell me
oh, come on,
that this bill is a long way from being what we ought to pass, then it raises some concerns with me, and I think it does with all of our colleagues across the country who are hearing the same thing.
Well, why was Senator Cornyn in the meeting, and what did I understand what Kentucky bankers are telling you, but what did the Wall Street people tell you?
Well, they have concerns about the bill. The Kentucky bankers have concerns about the bill. We all have concerns about the bill. I've even heard the Assistant Democratic Leader of the Senate say he's not sure he can get all of his members to support this bill. Right now, I think there's a pretty good shot, a pretty good reason to believe that there's bipartisan opposition to this bill. We ought to go back to the drawing board and fix it.
Let me try one more time. Why was Senator Cornyn in that meeting of all the other senators you could have taken with you?
Senator Cornyn is a United States Senator from Texas. He's going to be voting on this issue like all the rest of us are, simply because we are all involved in politics, as is the president. It doesn't mean that we can't discuss issues with people that we meet around the country who are deeply involved and concerned about what we're doing.
In meetings with people across the country, like in Wall Street. I know, Kentucky bankers, save it. You didn't meet with the Kentucky bankers. You met with the Wall Street bankers. Now, Crawley said, hey, you know what, that sets you up for the accusation that maybe you were trying to raise money. I don't love the phrasing of that, but you got to give her credit. She went, what, 3 or 4 times on the same question? Why was Cornyn there? Well, he's involved in politics. Wait, I thought you said you didn't want to politicize this issue. By the way, nothing drives me more crazy. It's all politics. Every issue is politicized. Please stop saying that. Okay, so at the end of it, do you get the sense of who's with the bankers and who isn't? Look, I don't know who isn't, actually. I don't get that sense at all. I know who's with the bankers, and that's Mitch McConnell and John Cornyn. And they're trying to kill this bill so they can get paid by those bankers. And don't let them deceive you into thinking anything otherwise.